Hey everybody, welcome to the GMG review. Today we're taking a look at Warhammer, the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness Rulebook, which was kindly sent to me in advance by Games Workshop as a complimentary review copy. Now, this right here is a hefty tome that represents the second edition of the Age of Darkness sort of series, which is playing games 10,000 years before the current 40k timeline during a period known as the Horus Heresy. This book is pretty intimidating. It runs, oh geez, how many pages? A nice, thick 332 pages for a rulebook, which feels like a lot, but I want to sort of, before I jump in and talk about the rules themselves for more experienced players, kind of digest what this thing is. So 332 pages. This is a much more, I'd say 90s through 2000s into the teens style 40k rulebook, where the game itself is mostly contained in this book as opposed to being spread out across codexes. And so before I dive in here, I want to kind of talk about the main differences between this game and Warhammer 40,000. I think a lot of you watching this today are going to be coming from this from a current Games Workshop design studio kind of a place. Now the lead designer on this, Andy Hoare, he is an old school game designer. He's worked for the studio in its older sort of like incarnations. And this book in particular, I think, reflects that design philosophy. And because the core engine of this game is actually an older rule set, it's built around the 3rd edition through 7th edition 40k rule set, which was the longest running sort of like core engine for the game. It's just structured in a way that I think that a lot of players of 40k today won't be familiar with. And that means that what you have is, instead of the bulk of the rules for units being contained in a codex or a data slate, they are actually contained in this book in what's called universal special rules. And so instead of sort of like compartmentalizing what things can do into the relevant unit, and what that does in contemporary 40k is it means that when you look at a data sheet for a unit, unless it's an army-wide special rule, which is still printed at the beginning of the army section of the codex, everything's sort of individual abilities, and even its weapon stats are there on that data slate. The same goes for Age of Sigmar, right, where a war scroll has all the relevant abilities. And the only things that are sort of like spread across an entire army typically are its allegiance abilities or army traits, its stratagems, and even those are contained in a separate book from the core rulebook. So sort of the design philosophy for the last little while has been make the core rules of 40k and Age of Sigmar relatively short, 20-25 pages, and then make the rest of the information float out there in the individual unit entries and codexes. So my opinion of that, it's neither here nor there to this review, but it does mean that information gets spread out a lot more widely as opposed to being condensed into a single book, which is what this is. So I guess short story long, this book might look really intimidating for the amount of rules in it, but remember that all of these special universal rules for the entire game are in this, and you're not going to refer to them unless a unit has that special rule. So you only need to digest roughly a third of this book in order to actually play the game, and that's the core rules for the game. So if I was just to go by raw page count, up until page 146, so this much of the book, this is the background. This is catching you up on 55 Horus Heresy novels, which again, a lot of you players coming to it from regular 40k probably won't have read. So it's the book is also designed to introduce you to, well, how is this different from Warhammer that I play today, and how is the world different, and why is this so compelling and different? Then the core rules of the game actually only go to, let's say here. So up until this point, once you get into battlefield terrain and special rules for terrain and the fortified walls, like we have unit entries at this point. Special rules start here. So there you go. So pages 146 to 230, that's actually the core rules of the game. It is a enhanced stat line game. There is some tables and memorization. There's some stuff that actually will be very unfamiliar to 3rd through 7th edition 40k players. And we made a lot of assumptions our first couple games that were just wrong. We had to actually refer to our cheat sheets and stuff, which were very handy. But it's only this much that you're probably going to want to know by heart. And even then, like knowing you won't probably need to know the rules for buildings every game, or flyers, or knights and titans. It's really just like this that you'll probably actually want to know sort of like as your core fundamental rules. And from there on, we're talking special rules. So like, how does barrage weapons work? Blast, blind, fear, hate, like literally printed special rules for the game. And then we're into color sections, beautiful Age of Darkness stuff, beautiful studio and staff armies, how you construct an army, and then the core mission structure for the game. And that's it at the end of all this. Psychic powers come at the end. So it looks really intimidating, but it's really not. If you're interested purely in the gameplay and you're not so interested in the background, you can save the background for later. You're cutting 144 pages out of this rulebook. The core rules themselves are roughly 100 pages, like 80, no, what did I say? 230 something? So yeah, 80, 90 pages. And again, full of illustrations, full color, lots of pictures in there too. Like it's not the core rules for Age of Sigmar that are just text. This is full of like, how does this work? Walkthrough examples and stuff for playing the game. So with that out of the way, that's where this rulebook kind of sits. This is an old school rulebook. It kind of covers the entire game in one go. What's not in here is army lists, and that leads me to my next thing, which is this. In the core rulebook, I literally skimmed over this because I'm an idiot. I was like, how do I put things together? I put together like the tactical marines that come in the box once, and then I thought I was just gonna throw this away. And I was trying to figure out what the point values are. Like, where are the point values for anything? They're actually in this booklet. That's the other half of this, which is your Legions of Astartes rules. These are a beginner booklet of rules for everything that comes into this box set. And the core armory and stuff as well. So this will be contained in the two other announced books, the Liber Hereticus and Liber Astartes, which will expand the army lists with all the stuff that veteran Horus Heresy players know and love, that they won't be able to use initially. But if you're coming to, the intent obviously is, if you're coming to Horus Heresy for the first time, you needed something in this box to allow you to play with the miniatures that come in here. All the rules for all the miniatures in this box are in this little pamphlet. So just don't throw this out. You're gonna need that, and we'll come back to it in a minute. So there it is. So there's my very long preamble for the Age of Darkness rulebook. So let's jump in and actually do an overview of the three sections literally that are in here, and how that breaks down as far as this rulebook and how it explains things to you. So core rules on. So I'm gonna just use my beautiful silk bookmark, because this is a lovely hardcover book. That comes in a starter set, which is crazy, and we'll go through it. So the rulebook itself, the basic sort of premise here is, what is the Age of Darkness that happens after the Great Crusade? So it's 10,000 years before the current events of Warhammer 40,000, and you're looking at a really different like Imperium. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but if you're new to this setting, you have to understand that the reason it's so compelling, I think, for a lot of people is, it's the Imperium upside down, right? The Imperium of Warhammer 40,000 is this like dark, slavishly religious, oligarchy and an authoritarian regime that expands across the entire galaxy and is rotting from the inside, right? Everything, it's only by like the better graces of like certain, hopeless lost causes and last stands that the Imperium is still like holding together 10,000 years later. But when we join this story in the first three books, you see an Imperium that's like, it's practically Star Trek. It's just, there is no religion, there are no gods, there's no like angels, there's none of this stuff. The Emperor's just a man who evolution has picked to be this incredibly powerful manifestation of humanity at its best. Incredibly powerful like psychic powers, can like do things with his mind, who is like reforged the world after this giant sort of like star-spanning empire that is still sort of kind of nameless, but humanity's like initial sort of like expanse into the universe collapses, and he pulls it all back together from Earth at this like restart. And the sort of like the Great Crusade is to liberate all of these planets that have plunged into what's called Old Night, which is this darkness that descends in the galaxy after this previous civilization basically falls to its knees. And the Space Marines aren't even the way you would think Space Marines are. The Space Marines are these sort of like, not like, I'd say enlightened, but free-thinking almost paragons of humanity that are not really indoctrinated anything except for what's called the Imperial Truth, which is just science and reason, science and reason, science and reason. And even the Mechanicum are like barely tolerated for their religious beliefs, and everyone looks at them like, man, we're gonna when we got time, we're gonna come back to you guys and fix what's wrong with whatever like praying to machines you guys are doing right now. And so it's really compelling because the Space Marines are more relatable. They're a lot more human, right? They look at regular humans, and the regular humans look at them like, wow, it's crazy what science can do, right? But they have like, they're more emotionally sort of like aware. They're not just these sort of like almost robotic, hypnotized, you know, indoctrinated killing machines. And it's from that starting point that I think the Horus Heresy is so interesting, because you have this sort of, hey, it could all be okay moment, but you still know the Titanic's gonna sink. It's all gonna go horribly wrong. And that's what the overview of this is. The great work, the remembrancers, and the iterators. Like, this is all stuff that if you've read the novels is kind of integral to the storyline. And then you've got the last moment where the Emperor is in charge of the Great Crusade. He goes back to Earth. And that's when Horus gets made the War Master, and he becomes this like sort of like almost quasi-religious figure amongst the Space Marine legions, because he's the best of them. He's the best leader. Then we have discussions of the armor, so things like the Crusade armor Mark II, which there's a helmet and a body for Crusade armor in the whatchamacallit, in the vehicle sprue in this box, which is kind of cool because I'm hoping they actually make these guys. Then Mark III, this came in the Prospero's Burns box. Mark IV, which came in the Betrayal at Caliph box, the previous sort of like plastic sets for this. Now Mark V isn't really an armor mark, it's whatever gets like hodgepodge together to keep the armor running after the initial sort of like explosion. And then Mark VI is the most advanced armor in the Heresy, prior to the Mark VII. And then you've got Mark VIII called Aaron armor, Mark IX, and Mark X, which is the new. Mark X is the new armor, obviously, that's worn in the 41st millennium. And then we get an overview of all the legions, right? So beautiful color section, discussion of each of the Primarchs. And the Primarchs are the 20 different sons, and they're not really sons, but they're the genetic creations of the Emperor. They're supposed to lead the Space Marine legions during this Great Crusade in compliance. And half of them, of course, fall down and go bad, and half of them stay ostensibly good and keep fighting for the Emperor. And so no matter what your favorite legion is, they kind of need to spend time on this in this book, because there's like, everyone's playing the same army. Everyone's playing Space Marines initially. Now there are going to be more things in the Horus Heresy. In the first edition, there's rules for the Imperial Army, which is not the Astra Militarum. It's similar. There's rules for the different like kind of rising cults. There's rules for the Mechanicum, not the Adeptus Mechanicus, but the Mechanicum of Mars, which is again a different kind of entity because it's all pre this war. And then the Solar Auxilia, which is the Imperial Army of like the solar system. And I'm probably missing something, but there's a couple more. There's the Chaos Cults kind of stuff and the demons. So you need to spend time on these 18 different legions, because 2 disappear and we don't know who they are, and something bad happened in the background, so that people can pick their army, because there's basically 18 armies initially in this second edition, although they've talked about free PDFs and stuff for the people with the existing armies. And picking your legion is kind of picking your army for this game. You all sort of have access to the same things, but then you have fundamental sort of playstyle differences that your legion's going to give you. So if an aggressive force would be things like the Blood Angels or the Space Wolves, or the more aggressive up close thing. Vehicle heavy stuff like the Iron Hands, the Iron Warriors, the Imperial Fists and their fortifications, the World Eaters and their assault, cadres and stuff like that. I do love that, and if you're not a big Horus Heresy fan, that the World Eaters are their basic iconography of the Great Crusade is white, blue, and green, because they have a planet on their thing, and then over time they become red because they're just soaked in blood forever. The Ultramarines, Baba G, and this is his sort of like previous moment to shine. Actually, of all the Primarchs, you think like, yeah, Rulebook Gilliman, he's such a big deal now in regular 40k. He actually screws up the most during this whole storyline. He does a bunch of really stupid things, and thinks that Father knows best, and so makes some like really poor decisions to this whole thing, which I think is interesting, which leads to him actually not being at the final battle. Mortarion, the Death Guard, who are like sort of like trench fighters almost. The Thousand Sons, and Big Giant Magnus the Red, whose story is probably one of the most tragic, because he thinks he's doing the right thing right until he isn't. And then of course Horus himself, the Luna Wolves, the Word Bearers, the First Heretic. It's almost all this guy and a guy named Erebus, who's one of his lieutenants, fault that all of this goes terribly wrong. And Lorgar, who looks a lot like the Emperor. Salamanders, Ferrus Manus, who's the sort of like eternal creation. This is the Legion that I painted for the Weekender, which is the Raven Guard. And Korax, again, kind of a tragic figure in this whole thing, along with Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter. And then the Alpha Legion, this is my previous Horus Heresy army, where there's a Primarch, maybe there's 2 Primarchs, maybe they're all Primarchs. Nobody knows. They're kind of the special forces, super sneaky secret squirrels of the Astartes Legion. And then it does go through the, that was the Army Master, the Talons of the Emperor. There's a ton of Horus Heresy stuff for the 10,000 for the Custodians, because they fight an entire war underneath the Imperial Palace, which is kind of madness, and the Sisters of Silence as well. And actually, these models in plastic, before they were available for 40K, were released as Horus Heresy miniatures. So you can actually thank the Horus Heresy for these being available. You have the Imperial Assassins, the Ordo Sinister, which is a Titan Legion of Psi Titans, the Solar Auxilia. So they go through this sort of like Imperial Army grouping, which is very cool. And the Mechanicum. So even though they're not featured yet, there is reference to all of the future sort of like armies that are going to be available in here. And then you got some demons and stuff too. Demons in the Ruin Storm. There's a Bloodthirster. And the pivotal events. So again, this does a great job of catching you up on literally 55 books. There's a ton of stuff in the Horus Heresy to try and absorb. And if you just absorb anything, if you absorb these first 145 pages, you'll be up to speed on all of the main pivotal events. You won't probably like real Horus Heresy fans. They're kind of like sports fans. They love the deep cuts. They love all these like minor sort of like cast of characters that are in all the novels and stuff too. And I'm a big fan of that. Actually, my Blood Angel army is going to be based on that. It's kind of deep cuts. Nazar Emmett, the Flesh Terror, who becomes the chapter master of the Flesh Terrors in the second founding. Because I'm a big Horus Heresy fan, and I've read everything up until now, this March of Terra stuff. And I think if you're coming to this from 40K, this was a really important section to put in here, because there's just too much to absorb. If you're a pure gamer, again, you're not going to care, and that person is screaming at this video right now and wishing I'd put timestamps on it to skip to when the rules start. But yeah, this was an important talking point, and I think for people that are kind of like, well, I'm kind of interested in it, but I don't know anything about the background, the setting and stuff, and I don't know why this would be different from regular 40K. This is why. It's because you're sort of intrinsically playing one faction, which is the Imperium fighting against itself, and there needs to be some explanation as to why and how that's going to make your army different. All right, so we're into the core rules. So I'm going to try and do each of these sections in 2 parts. I'm not going to go line by line through this thing. It's a giant rule book. It's another 150 something pages. And for the most part, there's a lot of familiar stuff for anyone who plays 40K. But I am going to give some kind of like Cole's notes on why is this difference. The big thing you're going to see in the beginning is, again, this is based on an older stat line for 40K. Although, ironically, a movement stat was not something that was in 3rd through 7th edition 40K. All infantry just moved 6 inches. So you have a movement stat, which is back, which is just your movement, your speed in inches. Weapon skill, ballistic skill. You'll notice they're not expressed in the new school to like what you need to roll or higher, like 2+, 3+, 4+, whatever. It's expressed as a value, and that's important because it's all comparative values. So there's basically the 40K 9th edition to wound chart, which is that equal to, lower, higher, or double thing, is the to hit chart now for your weapon skill. So when you're fighting in melee, to figure out what you're trying to roll to hit when you're rolling to hit, if your weapon skill is equal, then it's a 4, 5, or 6. It's a 50-50 chance. If your weapon skill is lower, you have to hit on a 5 or 6, which is a big difference from previous versions of this game. It actually means that high weapon skill miniatures are actually really well protected in melee from getting attacked, which just represents the fact they're better fighters. It's a very subtle change, but important. And then ballistic skill is your chance out of 6 of hitting, and higher ballistic skills can have even like rerolls to hit. So you can hit on 2+ and then have like even more a replicated chance basically of hitting. Strength and toughness, again, same as in regular 40K, comparative values. And then wounds, but interestingly enough, strength versus toughness doesn't use the 9th edition comparative values. It has its own table, and it's actually really easy to not be able to wound something. It can actually go off the table and be impossible to wound if it's more than double its value. So like strength 3 against toughness of 6, you just can't wound because it's double. And then I might be wrong with that. It might be double +1, but those general principles apply where like you have to forget what you know about 40K when it comes to those things. You have to actually realize that the tables are different. So the other thing that you won't notice, or that you'll see that's new here, is your initiative. And your initiative is your sort of lightness on your feet, how fast you are in combat, and your reflexes. And that's using a bunch of interesting ways. You know how in 40k 9th edition you roll a d6 to see how far you run? In the Age of Darkness, you add your initiative to your movement value when you run. So it actually means that there is a difference between someone who is fast and slow, and it's not just a random sort of like luck of the dice how far you move when you do these things. You can also gain bonuses for your movement being higher for things like charge rolls, which is interesting. There's a lot of granularity in there. And then your save value leadership, it's all fairly similar to what you see in other games, in current 9th edition, stuff like that. All right, so other principles: measuring, edge-to-edge bases, dice, how to roll a D3 or D6, D6. I love the fact that this is D66, so you have a high die, low die, right? So high die, so I'd roll a 16 there, a D66. Dividing, modifying, rolling off, randomizing. Returned our blast markers. So no more just like the blast rule or random numbers of hits. You actually put things under a template to see if they get hit or not. Leadership tests are not like they are in 9th edition 40k. It's a 2d6 test under your leadership. So you're rolling 2 dice, add them together, trying to get under whatever your leadership value is. And you can auto pass and fail. So double ones is always a pass and double sixes is always a failure. And then, yeah, a little spirit of the game clause too, which I think is important for here. The turn. So again, a different turn sequence. There's no psychic phase. It's just start of the active player's turn. So whoever is currently moving their miniatures. Moving, shooting, assaulting, and then the end of that turn when other things can trigger. This is the big, probably mental shift, and also the most familiar thing for people who've played older editions of 40k. This 3-phase system, for the longest time, was like the core mechanic of all of 40k, and is, I think, very like indicative of the engine this game is running on. It's simple, it's easy to remember, but adding the start and end of active player's turn just gives you a bucket basically for little like in-game lingering effects to begin and end at, and they don't actually really have much of an active thing in the turn. The one thing that is completely new and has been discussed a lot obviously already is the reaction system. And this is a token system where the not active player gains a point, basically a token in each of these phases to do a bunch of universal things and then bespoke things, as you've seen, based on what your legion is and your warlord trait as well. So extra things you can do. There's a bunch of stuff on the community page already for Warhammer community talking about the different legions and their own special reactions and army abilities and stuff. So unless otherwise noted, you get 1 reaction. You can't do reactions if you're pinned, falling back, locked in combat, or you've already made a reaction in the current phase, or another special rule like basically stops you from doing it. And there is 2 in each phase that are universal and everyone can do. So advance and withdraw, 2 big ones. It means that you're kind of like wondering, or you can either make yourself more aggressively move on to something. You can use it to like claim an objective or move more bodies onto something. You could also fall back if you're afraid of being charged and move away. And anybody can do these. There's no limit to who can do them or who can't do them. It has to be directly away whoever triggers you. Now, the reactions in the movement phase happen if someone comes within 12. As soon as someone comes within 12, you have to decide if you're going to react or not. If no one else walks within 12 later, you can't come back to that unit and react. So there is kind of a neat bait and switch thing going on there, and until you play it or see it played, you do kind of hem and haw over whether you're going to do it or not, which I think is actually, it draws you into the turn. A lot of early editions of 40k, 3rd through 4th through 5th, there was like your turn, and then there was the making armor saves and taking stuff off turn, which was your opponent's turn. You tended to check out during your opponent's turn because stuff was just happening to you. This kind of draws you back in and allows you to, have some impact on their turn that they're actively trying to minimize and you're actively trying to maximize. I just found it really engaging, and I think it's a clever way of making the game feel less sort of like one person's doing something, one person isn't. Shooting phase, same thing. You can return fire or evade. Return fire is something shoots at you, you shoot back. Also, your casualties don't matter because it's all simultaneous. So in previous incarnations of this game, there's things called support squads. You've seen the weapons previewed in the Warhammer community already. It's like a unit of 10 guys with missile launchers or 10 guys with las cannons. They weren't super popular because they were still just 10 one-wound space marines, sitting in combat that are sitting in the open or sitting in cover that would just get vaporized sometimes during a turn. And because they couldn't like move and fire, there wasn't a lot of like sort of incentive to take them. You didn't see them in the battlefield very often. But now they're kind of inherently protected by the fact that who wants to shoot 10 las cannons that could just suddenly shoot you back? Like, it's really subtle until you play the game and you're like, whoa, those squads went way up in value because they're terrifying all of a sudden during my turn. It's not like they can't do something. If I decide to light them up, whatever I light them up with is probably going to die in return. So it better be worth it. I better kill them, or I better bait out that return fire reaction somewhere else. The other one's evade, which is a reaction if you get shot after you make all your saves and stuff. You get what's called an after save. You can kiss the dirt and everybody gets a 5+ shrug against all the wounds that unit just took to try and stand back up. Again, super powerful, but it's a way of like, if you push that assault force forward, trying to keep them alive until your next turn so they can get to where they need to get to go. And you can only do one or the other typically, unless you have some way of getting an extra token in that phase. Not both of those things can happen. And you're kind of hemming and hawing between which one's more valuable. So again, keeps you in the turn. And then the assault phase, Overwatch, a unit gets charged. They can shoot that charging unit basically after they make their charge, or before or after they make the charge, but it doesn't really matter. But they just get to make it. And then Hold the Line, which is when you get charged, you get a bonus attack typically in this edition, or in this version of the game. You can do what's called disrupting that attack, and if you hold the line, you countercharge, and you basically like chuck grenades at people as they come in. You know what I mean? Brace yourself for the impact, and they don't gain that momentum with the bonus charge. And so yeah, so again, a clever way of keeping you into the system. So the movement phase stuff, I'm gonna not spend too much time on because it's all pretty familiar. You move your movement stat. They didn't do the 2 models need to be in range coherency. Everybody has to be within 2 of a friend, which is nice. A little looser coherency wise. Shooting phase, choose a target, select a weapon, roll to hit, roll to wound, allocate wounds from casualties. So there's a bit of difference in here, and that's going to be the rolling to hit. So it's your chance out of 6, like I said, your bliss skill. If your bliss skill is higher than 6, which means that, or 5, which means a 2+, then you get a second chance if you miss. So if your bliss skill is 6, you get a 2+ to hit, and then a 6+ reroll. 7 plus 5 plus, or sorry, 7 is 2 plus 5 plus, 8 is 2 plus 4 plus, and on 10 you get 2+ reroll basically to hit all the time. It's fun. It's just a way of expressing stats higher than 2+, which you can't do in regular 40k, and I think it's kind of clever. Snapshots is a rule where basically if you move with a heavy weapon, it's a -1 to hit, I think, in 9th edition 40k, and this you just hit on 6s automatically. And certain other things make you hit on snapshots. Rolling to wound, which is the different chart. So again, this is not the 40k chart. You'll notice if you're tied, right, 4+ down the line. If you're better, 3+ down the line. But if you're better by multiple amounts, it gets to 2+ pretty fast. So strength 3 against 1, if it's double, you get to 2+. Strength 4 against 2, 2+. And that kind of all still holds true. The problem is when you get to double +1. 1 can wound up to a toughness 4. Once you get toughness 5, drops off, can't wound it anymore. 2 can go to toughness 5. I guess it's double, it's triple maybe. Is it? No, because you can do 1 to triple. The math doesn't super make sense, so you kind of have to use the chart. There isn't like a guiding rule. But 10 is wounding everything on 2+, right? Until you get to toughness 10, which is a 4+. And you drop off if you're, so 6 versus 9. Again, it's not even double. It just drops off at a certain point. So you gotta actually pay attention to the chart. And then allocating wounds. This is a lot nicer. First, the player whose unit is the target of the attack selects any one model in the unit within range and line of sight. If any models in the target unit have already lost 1 or more wounds, but have not moved as a casualty, it must be allocated to them. So you don't have to worry about the closest models all dying. There was some stuff in the previous edition that you'd have like artificer armor guys stand out front and eat all the small arms fire, so they would just like soak it up. It was just kind of gamey, and they took it out by just having any models get killed. There's a rule for instant death. If your strength is double the toughness of the target, then no matter how many wounds you are, you can just die. Some rules can get around that, like Eternal Warrior. Invulnerable saves and armor-piercing weapons. So there's no AP value that reduces your armor save in this game. You always get your armor save or you don't. That's why things like invulnerable saves become important. If you don't get your armor save, you can then make your invulnerable save instead. So like a Cataphractii Terminator hit by a Meltagun, its AP is 1. So if the AP is equal to or less than your armor value, you just don't get a save. Buddy has a 4+ invulnerable save, which you can always take on top of that or instead of. Damage mitigation is the name for after saves, any saves that happen after you take your wounds and fail your saves. And then armor-piercing weapons, of course, can have additional rules too, like rending, where their armor penetration can improve. Anybody who is intervening, so if you shoot through other troops, you get a 6+ cover save. Cover saves are effectively invulnerable saves. Even if a wound, penetrating hit, or glancing hit ignores all armor saves, a cover saving throw can still be made. And cover saving throws based on the kind of cover, so like harder the cover, the better the save you can get. Examples of weapons. Now, there are some other rules too that you're not going to, sort of, if you're a 40k player, not going to realize. Rapid fire weapons can't be fired and still make an assault move in the same turn. So if you're shooting your bolters in regular 40k, you can still charge after. Not in this game. You got to have your sidearm. So having a pistol sidearm actually becomes really important because you can dump out of like a vehicle or move into assault range, fire your pistols, and still charge in. Now your charge move, a lot like regular 40k, is at 2d6 roll, and then you move guys afterwards, get somebody into contact. There is a new rule in here though, where your charge distance is affected by your movement characteristics. So if your movement is 0, you can't charge. If your movement is 1 to 4, you're -1 to your charge rolls. If it's 5 to 7, you're ±0. If it's 8 to 10, you're +1. 11 to 12, +2, and 13 +3. So you actually get bonuses to your charge range based on how fast you go, which makes bikes, jump pack models actually really interesting because they can long bomb charges you wouldn't normally think you can make. Because the average 2d6 roll is a 7, right? So you can kind of comfortably make 8s and 9-inch charges if you're a 13+ mover, which is super cool. And the fight subphase, it's pretty similar to what you'd imagine before, except for these changes to rolling to hit. Now the roll to wound chart is the same as the shooting one, so I won't go through that again, but you can see the hit chart here is, as the chart on the right shows, if the attacker's weapon skill is half or less than the attacker's, they're hitting on a 2+. Lower than the attacker's, but more than half, they're hitting on a 3+. If the target's weapon skill is equal, it's 4. And if higher but not twice as high, it's a 5. If twice as high, it's a 6. So that weapon skill, like 8 Primarch, is getting hit on 6s in melee, right? It's a big deal having a high weapon skill all of a sudden because it makes you very hard to actually attack. So certain units like Dreadnoughts would kind of fear things like Power Fist Sergeants because it was hard to get through 10 wounds to get to that Power Fist before it killed you. Now that Power Fist has to hit you on 5s if your weapon skill is 5 and his is 4, and that's a huge quality of life improvement, which I'll also talk about because Dreadnoughts they got a quality of life improvement by just not being vehicles. They're walkers. And then of course, falling back and morale. You don't just remove casualties in this game, you actually move the models when they flee, and they can rally and come back into the fight. So there is an interesting there's an interesting difference in this and regular 40k where models just kind of like poof and disappear. In this one, it's an older version of sort of morale checks. When you fail a test for taking casualties, if you take 25% or more, then you run away instead. You can also regroup. And then unit types. Now there's a lot of interesting stuff in here just based on your keywords and your unit type. So like infantry don't have a lot of extra special rules, but cavalry do. They can't be pinned. They're not slowed down by difficult terrain, even if they charge, when they move 3d6 when they fall back rather than 2d6, and no model that's not cavalry can join them. Automata, they're automatically fearless, so no morale. Successful wounds inflicted by attacks with poison or fleshbane must be re-rolled because you're robots. And a unit that includes one or more model with these, this unit type can't make reactions, so you can't react with them. And no model that is not also the automatic can join them. So your robots can't react, and they also can't like run away. And then Dreadnoughts have kind of all the same rules. You can't, you have to reroll fleshbane and poison attacks. They're all fearless. They can fire all their weapons in the shooting phase, including as part of a reaction. A model Dreadnought may fire heavy and ordnance weapons and cancel stationary even if they move, and can charge as normal, and no model can join a Dreadnought unit unless they're also a Dreadnought. Then you got demons. Now the demons have some neat stuff. There's obviously no demons in the rules in this box, but the fact that their strength and toughness value is based on the game turns. So they're strongest at the beginning when they've first been summoned, and they slowly get sucked back into the warp over the course of the game. So on turns 1 and 2, they're +1 all their strength and toughness. On turns 3 and 4, they're +0. And on turns 5 and 6, they're, -1. And on turn 7+, they're -2. So they slowly get weaker over time, which is kind of cool. They'll cause fear. Force weapons cause instant death to them. They're immune to effects of fear and pinning. And no model that's not demons can join demons. And then Primarchs. Now Primarchs all have nested rules. Again, this is nested rules, right? So if something has the Primarch keyword, the rules are in the rulebook. This is what I'm talking about when it comes to, there's so much in here. You don't need all this all the time, right? But it's all siloed into the rulebook instead of being out in the codexes and the expansions. So like Primarchs, for instance, they're all independent characters, which means they can join and lead units. or be out by themselves. Eternal Warriors, they don't suffer instant death. Fearless, which means that they don't run away. It will not die every turn. It's start of, I think it's either start of active player's turn. They roll a die for every wound they've taken, and on a 5+, they get that wound back. Bulky, they take up 4 spots in the vehicle, and Relentless, they can move and fire heavy weapons without snapshotting. And they always count as character models. And then there's like a bunch of other stuff on top of that. They can shoot anything in a unit. They pick the casualties that they cause because they're moving at 7 times the speed of sound. All kinds of other neat little things in there. Monstrous creatures, artillery, heavy. Oh, and then these are subtypes. So everything has a subtype in the game, and these are actually really key to what they can do in missions. So the most important one is your line unit subtype. That means you can score objectives. So the Space Marine Tactical Squads all have that. Nothing else in this box has the line subtype. And being able to have the line subtype is like massively important to winning the game, because you cannot control objectives unless you're line. You can contest and like take them away from people, but you can't actually hold them yourself. So your Tactical Marines are not just fodder, right? They're really important to securing stuff on the table. They're both a scoring and denial unit. The other units that are in here that are kind of neat are heavy, the heavy subtype. Now they can reroll all failed armor saves against blast and template weapons. That's really cool. So like if you get rolling in heavy flame by Cataphractic Terminators because they have the heavy subtype, I just go, ha, 2+ with the reroll, and I just walk through the fire. They're designed for that kind of work, right? They're these like giant, thick, bulky suits that can walk through like blast damage. But the trade-off for that, they cannot run, and when making a movement during a reaction, they're -1 to their initiative. So they basically reduce the distance to move, right? So it's like they're ponderous, right? They don't get to make any super fast moves. The light is basically the opposite. They get cover saves when they run. They get +1 to their initiative when they make reactions like that. And then characters, which are all independent. It's very different from current 40k, where characters can actually join units and become part of them. They can further leadership, but also they're subject to like falling back or getting dragged away and stuff like that. Now the psychic phase, there is no psychic phase in this game. So psychic phase typically happens when the power would manifest. So if it's like you're throwing lightning with your psychic power, it happens in the shooting phase. It'll usually say when it happens, and most of them are activated either automatically as like a weapon profile that you're now carrying, or by making a leadership test and trying to pass. There's different disciplines. Some basic ones are in here that everybody can get, and you can also take damage from Perils of the Warp. Vehicles. Okay, so this is where we start to really get back to old school rules and really drift away from current 40k. The stat line. Movement, so your movement stat makes sense. Ballista skill, same as a regular model. Now you got armor values. So front, side, and rear armor. This is all determined by your facing to the vehicle, right? So rear, front, left, and right. And it's typically done by taking a line from the tracks or the wheels or whatever the hull is, corner to corner, and determining what the majority of the shooting thing is in what arc. You roll your strength plus a d6 and try and compare it to the front, side, and rear armor. And then if you exceed it, you've done a penetrating hit. If you've mashed it, you do a glancing hit. There can be different damage results based on those two things. And if you take penetrating hits, you typically lose hull points. But there's no multi-damage weapons. Well, there are, but they're super rare. They're called brutal weapons in this game. And so 5 hull points on a Land Raider Proteus, which, interestingly enough, we might have some las cannons for in this box, is 14 all around. So it's the toughest. It's a Land Raider, right? And 5 hull points doesn't look like a lot of wounds. I think a Land Raider in 40k has 16 wounds, but because there's not really any multi-damage stuff in the game, those 5 wounds last a long time. You have to penetrate with 5 las cannon hits. And that means you have to roll a d6 plus 9. So you have to roll a 6 5 times to penetrate to get through all 5 of those hull points. It is not easy to do. You can do damage with glancing hits and stuff rarely, but mostly it just messes up what it can do the following turn or immobilizes it or something. You can ram, you can overrun people, all kinds of fun stuff with vehicles, and vehicles get their own whole section here. There's the vehicle damage result. So on an actual hit that does hull points, where is it? Armor rolls. If it's less than, no effect. If it's equal, it's glancing. If it's greater than its a penetrating hit. That's right. So glancing, you lose a hull point. Penetrating, you lose a hull point, but then you also roll a d6 on here and see what happens. You can modify this based on your AP. So if your AP is 2 or better, it's +1 or +2 if it's 1 to roll on this table. On a 1 to 3, it can only fire snapshots, only hits on 6s, and certain weapons can't fire. 4, crew stun. 5, weapon destroyed, you blow off a gun. 6, it's immobilized. 7+, it actually blows up. So very rarely on a penetrating hit can you just destroy it in one go. It can still happen, but very, very hard to do. You typically have to roll a 6 with a +1. So you have to be hitting with a AP2 or better weapon, and then also roll a 6 on the die to get it. It happens, but it's not that common. Vehicles can get cover saves and stuff too, and their armor can happen. Transporting, different classes of vehicles, slow, fast, skimmers, knights and titans. And then we're into battlefield terrain, and that's the core rules in a nutshell there, right? So move, shoot, assault, and then end of turn. If you've got your morale stuff that you do at the beginning of the turn, during start of player's turn or end of player's turn, that stuff triggers, and that's it. Rules for buildings, rules for battlements. So you've got stuff on what happens when you attack a building, fortified walls, imperial bunker, defense line. Just given generic rules, by the way, so you can buy them. And then all the special rules, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but they have been changed quite a bit, along with a lot of the vehicle weapons. I'm going to take a look at the booklet over here to talk about that, but these are your universal special rules that apply to pretty much everybody. Then all the beautiful color stuff, some lovely paint jobs in here by the specialist design crew. So there's Mark Rayner's Sons of Horus, Abaddon and his Justinian Terminators. Mark Bedford's Iron Hands. Mark did some Iron Hands. He also painted the Raven Guard in here, which are really cool. I got to catch up with him actually at the Weekender, and yeah, he did a great job on all the stuff that he did in here. Stephen May's Word Bearers, along with some crazy demon stuff. Mark Bedford's Salamanders. You can tell Mark likes the Horus Heresy. Holy moly. And he's been working for Forge World forever. Rich Dancy's Night Lords. Mark Bedford's Raven Guard. And this was the stuff I was checking out while I was painting my Raven Guard too. You can see it's a mix of the newer and older stuff. And I have a suspicion, Mark, that that's a plastic Leviathan. I'm very, very sneaky suspicious that it's a plastic Leviathan. And I'll tell you why, if you want to see in camera. I like doing this, looking at rulebooks and trying to figure out if some new stuff's like hidden in here in the shots. If you look at the basing, all of Mark's old Raven Guard are based slightly differently from the new Raven Guard, and this is based to match these guys. So either he painted this recently, right, and it's just the regular resin one, or that's a new plastic Leviathan, which I think would be crazy cool, and it's been painted up for the future. I was doing, like, trying to spot the rhinos and stuff in here that I knew were new. There's Solar Auxilia. And then how you play. So preparing to play. So what do you need to play a game? Well, detachment stuff's pretty familiar. Same battlefield rules: HQs, troops, elites, fast, heavy, fortifications, Lords of Wars, and a Primarch. Total army size, how much you can spend on a Lords of War or Primarch. So you only spend 500 points in a 2,000 point game on a Primarch or Lord of War. So you better hope you got cheap stuff. And then this is the core Crusade Force organization chart. It's different from just the old 40k one because you can have a Primarch or fortification in here. And you're required to have an HQ, up to 3 HQs, 2 troop choices, up to 6 troop choices, 4 elites, and then 3 fast, 3 heavy, a fortification, and a Primarch. Lord of War is an optional attached detachment, and you can take 1 allied detachment, which requires an HQ and a troop choice. And what's cool about that is because you have all of these like little survivor units in Horus Heresy, they give you an allied matrix for what legions fought with what legions. And you can do some fun stuff where you have like a little bit of like a side legion stuff. So when the Liber, Astartes, and Hereticus come out, it's gonna be super fun because you can sort of mix and match your color schemes and have like some of the story-driven stuff where certain chapters or certain legions fought together, be driven by that. And some just won't. If it's by the Emperor's or War Master's command, you don't even like each other. You don't even count as the same army. Distrusted allies can have special rules against them. Fellow warriors, you're basically ambivalent. And then sworn brothers basically count as the same army except for the purposes of like army-specific rules. Warlord traits do exist. There's only 3 core ones. Each one is to do with basically gaining a reaction in a certain phase. So like Bloody Handed is going to give you 1 in the assault phase. Stoic Defender is going to give you a shooting phase 1, and Ever Vigilant is going to give you a movement phase 1. They get some additional stuff too. Those are the core ones. Again, the new Libers will have more stuff and sort of like Legion specific on top of that. showcasing some battlefields, and then the 6 core missions. So how do you play the 6 core missions? Blood Feud, Onslaught, Shadow Strike, Dominion, Tide of Carnage, and War of Lies. They're structured a lot more like, so they don't have deployment. So think of them, they're structured a lot like an Age of Sigmar battle plan, except you randomly determine the deployment style as well. And that can massively shift the game. So there's 6 things to play for, and then 6 ways to play for them, including like an ambush. Like there's asymmetrical deployment in here, which makes me so happy. I am sort of bored of the industry standard of standing in circles and pushing buttons and everything being symmetrical. I'm very happy to see some asymmetrical deployment in here. I mean, it's 1 out of 6, but it's still 1 out of 6, and that's going to make for some very different kind of games. Some familiar stuff like Seizing the Initiative, and then your 6 missions, and that's it. There we go. Psychic Disciplines, rules for some powers and stuff. And a nice quick reference. Although there are beautifully painted quick reference sheets in the box set. And that's the core book, right? It has a glossary or an index, which is fantastic. Any rulebook with an index today drives me crazy when I'm looking for something. And there you go. A little thing on you should go read the books, but there's a great ton of background in here. And that's the rulebook. So there you go, big giant rulebook. Let's take a quick flip through here. You can see some examples of stuff that's pretty clever and how things might have changed. You get your rules for the Praetors, the 2 Praetors that come in here, as well as an option to buy them Paragon Blades, which is just like an enhanced melee weapon. Your Cataphractii squad, and so each of these is roughly, it's 150 and 160, so 310 points for the Praetors. Your Cataphractii squad, if you start giving it like a heavy flamer and a sergeant with extra weapons and some chain fists, so it'll run about 300. So you're looking at 610. Contemptor, again, both arms can get swapped out. So you could give them 2 Gravis autocannons, or an autocannon and a las cannon, or a melta-cannon and a bolt cannon. If you don't have the parts on the frame, but you could give it 2 fists as well. If you've got 2 boxes or split one with somebody or traded for it. And here's the big change for the Contemptor. He has a strength and toughness. No vehicle rules. He's just got wound, strength, and toughness, and kind of counts as a vehicle for certain things. Tactical squads, so he's about 200, so you're looking at 8, 10, roughly. Tac squads, 4 of them, they'll be about 125 each once you give them their Nuncio Voxes and Sergeant stuff and bayonets, maybe 130. So let's say that's another 265, 20. So 520 plus, what did I say so far? 520 plus 800 and 10, you're looking at 1330. And the Spartan's about 400 points. Sorry, no, it's more than that. It's because it's more than 520. And there's 2 squads of the Terminators, which means there's 600 points. So 600, 900 plus, so 1100 plus another 520 is 1650, and then 350 landers. So it's about 2,000 points. And the Spartan's got 6 hull points. You can see giant ballistic skill, tons of weapon options. And there's some neat stuff in here that you can see for the first time. So like the plasma guns. Plasma guns were sort of like notorious as a marine killer in 40k. You'll notice there's strength 7 and assault, or sorry, only AP 4. They don't have AP all the time, but they have the rending 4+ rule, and they're assault 2. So that's a plasma blaster rather. Same thing as a plasma gun. But a plasma pistol is the same way too. Pistol 1, strength 7, AP 4. So they don't always get through marine armor, but on a 4+ to wound, they get +2 AP. And that's a big deal. Or maybe it's to hit, or needs to hit actually. But they get a bonus 2 AP and become AP 2. So neat little quality of life things in here like that. Yeah, the plasma gun's over here, sorry for the combi weapon. Strength 7, AP 4, rapid fire, rending 4+, gets hot 1 shot. The chain bayonets are amazing. Build all your Marines with chain bayonets, +1 strength, melee, 2-handed shred, which means that they get 2 attacks on the charge each, and then they get strength 5, and they reroll all their failed rolls to win with shred. The chain bayonet's amazing. Weirdly, the chain fist doesn't have shred. I wish it did. And then all of your other stuff in here for like the deflector and the dreadnought, which is still a 5+ save, or invulnerable save, power armor, artificer armor rules. Grenade rules, the rules for the Nuncio Vox and the searchlights and stuff, the flare shield, which just makes the Land Raider almost unkillable. But I'm looking forward to seeing what the indexes give us, because this is obviously just what's in here. And you can watch the Let's Play today to see how that all went down, and how the game sort of like plays out of the box. And so there it is, the Age of Darkness rulebook. I'm very excited about it. It's a new version of a very old, familiar game. And you can see what you think by watching Let's Play today. So big thanks for watching. Big thanks to GW for sending me the book. And until next time, I'm Ash. Happy working. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. There are tons of other games already recorded for you to watch. Click over to my channel page if you haven't already, and have a look through the dozens of playlists full of videos. I guarantee you'll discover a game you haven't seen played before. I put out new videos 7 days a week, and every day is themed to a different genre as I continue to explore the wider world of gaming. Of course, none of that's possible without you, the viewer, so click a like and subscribe if you'd like to stay on top of what's happening here daily. My 2 kids and I are massively grateful to be able to have the flexibility of this job so I can always maximize my time with them. If you want to support me continuing to put out this content, it's only possible because of my amazing backers on Patreon who support the studio, equipment, and model cost, as well as being how I make the bulk of my living. You can also help out by buying a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, a measuring gauge or widget from Death Ray Designs, or buying one of my games and supplements like Last Days, Gamma Wolves, and Blaster. As a way of showing my appreciation, patrons get early access to new games and supplements that I write throughout the course of the year. Huge thanks for watching, it really does help out, and happy gaming.